I never expected a forgotten envelope to change everything. It was supposed to be just another quiet family, Sunday warm food, light conversation, the same familiar laughter echoing down the hallway. But in a dusty corner of my old study, hidden between yellowing pages of a long forgotten cookbook, I found a folded piece of paper that pulled the curtain back on a truth I had buried for far too long. What happened next at the dinner table was not just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. And if you've ever been the silent pillar in your family, giving without asking, sacrificing without applause, this story may feel all too familiar. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday afternoon, the kind of slow, easy day when family chatter floats lazily in the air, the smell of roasted chicken mixes with freshly baked cornbread, and laughter echoes from the kitchen to the back porch. The kind of day when nobody expects drama. The kind of day that starts soft and ends even softer, with hugs and goodbyes and let me know when you get home safely. And yet, it was on a Sunday, just like that one, that everything in our family quietly cracked open, and it all began with one forgotten envelope. The house was buzzing with familiar energy. My daughter Eleanor was preparing her signature green bean casserole while her husband hovered nearby, pretending to help. My grandson, Tyler, was lounging on the couch in the living room, tapping away at his phone, likely updating one of his dozen social media accounts or monitoring his cryptocurrency alerts, which he loved to brag about. The other cousins, in-laws, nieces, and nephews filtered in and out of rooms, setting the table, pouring lemonade, laughing over inside jokes that never quite made it to me. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, as I always did, out of the way but still watching, a quiet observer with a half-warmed cup of coffee in my hand. It was during one of those quiet lulls between conversations that I excused myself to the study. I hadn't been in there in months. My late husband's books still lined the shelves, and the sun painted soft yellow patches on the carpet through the blinds. I don't even remember why I walked in. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe I was looking for that old photo album to show little Nora how her mother used to wear pigtails and throw tantrums over carrot sticks. But instead, my hand drifted toward a dusty stack of books piled beside the bookshelf. They hadn't been touched in ages. One of the books, a tattered cookbook filled with 1980s church potluck recipe, shed a slight bulge in the center. Curious, I opened it. Pages flipped open stiffly, dry with age. There, nestled between heavenly hash brown casserole and sinful chocolate sheet cake, was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the corners, the flap still glued shut as if it had waited for me all these years. My name was written on it in Eleanor's handwriting. I paused, heart suddenly alert in my chest. This wasn't a recipe. This wasn't nostalgia. This was something else. I carefully peeled it open, unfolding the single sheet of paper within. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from that sixth sense we sometimes get when we know we're about to learn something we weren't meant to know. It was an invoice, not from a store, not from a utility company, but typed up on a home computer. The date at the top hit me like a cold slap. November 15th, 2017. The amount, 48,230. The note, loan provided by mom to Eleanor for Tyler's Stanford tuition and associated expenses, to be returned in full when Tyler begins earning independently. My breath caught. I remembered that money. Of course I did. How could I forget? It had taken nearly everything I had left in my savings. At the time, Eleanor had been panicked. Tyler had gotten into Stanford a dream come true, she said, and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that couldn't be missed. She and her husband were struggling financially after a business flop, and student loans had already buried them. She had called me in tears, her voice cracking through the phone, saying, "Mom, please. I know it's a lot, but I promise we'll pay you back. I promise." Back then, I hadn't hesitated. I was still living modestly, managing my small pension and widow's benefit. I dipped into my emergency savings, the one I swore I would only use if I fell gravely ill or if the roof collapsed. But I told myself, family comes first. Help now, trust later. And then I foregoed her rather I buried it. Eleanor never mentioned repayment again. I never asked. And Tyler? He never even thanked me directly. Over the years, I watched him flourish from Stanford to a tech internship in Singapore, then launching his own crypto startup that made the news last year. The whole family celebrated him like a prodigy. He bought himself a Tesla before he turned 27. He traveled to Iceland, Peru, Bali. He gave motivational talks on Zoom. But not once did he ever say, "Thanks, Grandma. I owe you everything." I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe Eleanor had repaid me quietly, gradually, through all those years of helping with groceries or paying for family trips. But this invoice told another story. She had printed it, saved it, hidden it, and judging by the zeroed out payment section at the bottom, not a single dime had been returned. My hands clenched the paper. I looked around the study, suddenly seeing the dust, the decay, the years that had passed with no recognition of the sacrifice I had made. A deep ache formed in my chest, not from regret but from betrayal. Not a single word, not one mention. I had been erased from the narrative. Down the hallway, I could hear the familiar clink of silverware and someone laughing at a joke I didn't catch. The world went on as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Right there in that quiet study, a hidden truth had surfaced, and I couldn't let it stay buried. I walked back into the living room with the envelope in my hand. Nobody noticed at first. I sat at the table again, placed the paper on the placemat before me, and waited. Waited for the right moment. The perfect moment. One that would tear the curtain down gently but unmistakably. And oh, that moment was coming. Sooner than they thought. The envelope lay on the table like an unexploded bomb, innocent to anyone else's eyes, but to me, it pulsed with everything unspoken, unpaid, and unacknowledged. I didn't say a word yet. I watched them, the ones I loved, the ones who had taken so much, unknowingly or not. Tyler was still sprawled on the couch, talking animatedly about some new virtual coin he was backing. His voice carried across the room, full of that bright, buoyant self-assurance only young men with unchecked success can afford. "They're projecting it'll 10x in 6 months, he said. Not to me, of course, but to his cousin. If it does, I'm thinking of launching my own platform. Like, why not? I've already got the team lined up." That's when it clicked. The tuition, the early flights, the internship stipends, the apartment he'd rented in San Francisco. None of it had just magically happened. I stared at the invoice again, reading the breakdown now with clearer eyes. Each item suddenly had a face, a memory. The 7-0 labeled initial semester housing wasn't just a number, it was the cramped apartment near Palo Alto Tyler once posted a video tour of, proudly pointing out his espresso machine and floor-to-ceiling windows. The 15-0 listed under tuition advance was the semester he said he took a leap of faith and dropped his part-time job to focus on creating impact. The final 8-0, labeled vaguely as startup capital, must have been the seed money for the flashy app he launched, a game changer for student mental health. He had called it on LinkedIn, his face smiling next to big words like founder, visionary, tech disruptor. I had unknowingly bankrolled the entire illusion. It wasn't Eleanor's survival I'd secured, it was Tyler's empire. And the most ironic part? He had no idea. At least, not from the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. There was no reverence in his tone when he bragged about his path. No humility, no trace of gratitude. Just that polished, slick charm that hid behind $1,000 blazers and fast-talking ambition. The betrayal twisted deeper, not because I wanted the money back that ship had long sailed, but because I'd been so easily written out of the story. Tyler had given speeches at family parties, talking about believing in yourself and overcoming hardship. He once even dedicated a toast to his parents. "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for supporting my dreams when no one else could." I remember clapping. I remember swallowing the bitter taste and smiling anyway. I told myself it wasn't my place. But this time, something inside me refused to stay silent. A voice inside my head rose up, steady and cold. They let you become invisible. They let you fade into the wallpaper, while they cashed in your sacrifices. I took one more look at the invoice before folding it neatly and slipping it into my sweater pocket. Then I stood, walked over to the dining table where everyone was beginning to gather for the meal, and sat at the head not my usual spot. It took a few seconds for the shift to register. My daughter blinked. Her husband raised his eyebrows. Someone said, "Oh, Mom, do you want to sit here today?" I just nodded. Nobody protested. The food began arriving, plates passed, laughter bubbling. And still, I said nothing. Not yet. I waited. I watched. I listened as Tyler regaled everyone with his plans to invest in a new wellness app, casually mentioning that one of his backers was a famous influencer. He was magnetic when he talked, fluid, confident. I could almost forget the boy he used to be. The boy who once cried when he couldn't afford a used laptop. The boy whose mother came to me in tears, begging for help. Then, when the noise settled into a lull, I cleared my throat. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Heads turned, forks paused. "I found something today," I said, gently placing the envelope on the table. "Something from a few years ago." Eleanor's eyes went to the paper instantly. She knew. I saw in the way her face stiffened. Her husband looked puzzled, leaning forward to read the label. Tyler, oblivious, smiled and said, "What's that, Grandma? A new recipe?" Some laughed politely. I didn't return the smile. "No, Tyler," I said, unfolding the paper slowly. "This isn't a recipe. It's a reminder." A silence rolled over the table. Not sharp, not sudden, but thick and creeping, like fog settling over a lake. I pushed the paper forward, turning it so they could all read the typewritten lines. Nobody reached for it. "This," I said, my voice steady now, "is a record of a loan I gave Eleanor. For you, Tyler. For your tuition, your living expenses, your first step into the world." Tyler blinked. "Wait, what?" Eleanor finally spoke, her voice low, defensive. "Mom, I told you back then I would handle it. You didn't want to talk about repayment. You said," I interrupted gently, "that I trusted you, that I believed in family, that I thought someday the people who benefited would remember." My gaze swept across the table. Nobody moved. Tyler let out a soft, awkward laugh. I didn't know any of this. I mean, I thought Dad took out a loan or something. You never said anything." "And you never asked," I replied, locking eyes with him. "Not once." The silence turned into discomfort. You could feel it. Everyone was suddenly remembering moments they had ignored, stories they had rewritten in their favor. Even the cousins who usually stayed out of drama looked down at their plates. I turned back to Eleanor. "You let me fade into the background while everyone clapped for your son. You watched me struggle some months to pay my bills and still didn't think to bring this up. Not once." Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "Don't worry," I continued. "I don't want a dime, but I do want something that has more weight than any check. I want the truth acknowledged. Because if family means anything, it starts with honesty." Tyler was pale now, his earlier arrogance stripped away. His mouth moved, then stilled again. For once, he had no clever line, no TED Talk-worthy phrase to save the moment. The air at the table had changed. There was no more lightness, no more laughter, only the heaviness of reckoning. And yet, underneath it all, something else flickered, a long overdue awakening. That was the moment I realized. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your worth is to place it in front of the people who forgot it. Not with anger, not with shame, but with facts, with proof. And with unwavering dignity, no one touched their food. The golden roast chicken sat untouched in the center of the table. The mashed potatoes were growing cold, the steam from the casserole dish now just a faint memory. Tyler's once cocky smile had disappeared entirely, and his hands fidgeted in his lap, thumb brushing anxiously against his phone. The invoice lay where I had left it, insolent, damning, undeniable. The room, just moments ago filled with warmth and weekendese, had shifted. What had begun as a gentle confrontation was starting to turn. I could feel it, like the pressure change before a storm. The air grew heavy with defense, with embarrassment, with guilt, camouflaged as confusion. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused. I had simply placed the truth before them like an offering. And still, the tension thickened. Eleanor's husband, Greg, cleared his throat too loudly. I mean, this was years ago, right? He began, his tone attempting calm, but laced with irritation. Why bring this up now, Mom? I thought this was something between you and Eleanor. My eyes met his. It was never just between me and Eleanor. That money was meant for Tyler. And look at where he is, now successful, traveling the world, launching companies. Shouldn't that success begin with gratitude? Tyler shifted in his chair, his voice finally breaking through. I told you I didn't know. You think if I had known, I wouldn't have said thank you? You think I wouldn't have? You didn't know, I interrupted, gently but firmly. But don't you wonder why no one ever told you? Doesn't it make you pause even a little to realize your entire foundation was paid for by someone you never once credited? He stared at me. For a moment, there was nothing behind his eyes, no denial, no anger, just stunned silence. I pressed on. I remember the day I transferred that money. I sat alone in the bank, my hand shaking, wondering if I was doing the right thing. It was almost everything I had in savings. But I believed in you. I believed in both of you. I thought someday you would look back and remember who made that leap of faith first. Eleanor stood now, arms crossed. So, this is what? A public shaming? You want applause? A parade? Mom, you've always done things like this. Silent expectations, hidden resentment. It's like you sit back waiting for us to disappoint you so you can feel righteous. Her words hit me like stones. I didn't flinch, but inside, something splintered. Still, I refused to match her volume. I wanted to feel seen, Eleanor. That's not the same as wanting praise. I wanted to know I mattered. The cousins and other family members sat frozen, their eyes darting between us, unwilling to speak, but unable to look away. One of them, Julia, finally whispered, I had no idea, Grandma. I gave her a nod. Most of you didn't, because I kept it quiet, because I believed that love was enough, that when people say thank you with their actions, words become unnecessary. But years passed, and nothing came back. Not a single conversation, not a single gesture. I faded into the wallpaper, while my savings vanished into someone else's future. Tyler's voice cracked, but I am grateful. I swear. I didn't know how much it cost you. I thought Mom figured it out. You thought someone else handled the debt, I said. And they did. Me. Eleanor sat back down abruptly, her eyes wet but her jaw clenched. I was doing the best I could. You made it sound like it didn't matter. You said you wanted us to be okay. And I meant it, I replied. But wanting you to be okay doesn't mean I want it to be erased. Greg chimed in again, trying to shift the tone. Okay. Let's not let this ruin dinner. We're family. We're here together. That's what matters, right? But it was Tyler who spoke next, this time with a depth I hadn't heard in years. No, Greg. She's right. We did erase her. I did. I was so busy chasing the next success story, so caught up in proving myself to the world, I never stopped to ask who gave me the platform to begin with. I never asked the cost. He turned to me fully now. Grandma, I can't go back in time. I can't undo the silence. But I can say this. I'm sorry. I see you now. And I owe you not just financially, but for every moment you believed in me when I didn't even know you were watching. The room grew still, real still. The kind of stillness that follows a moment of truth so raw, no one dares disturb it. For the first time, tears sprang to my eyes. Not from sadness, from relief. He finally saw me. Eleanor wiped her eyes. She didn't speak, but something in her face softened some wall beginning to crack, even if just a little. I nodded once. I don't want your money, Tyler. What I want is something worth more. I want presence. I want you to remember who held the rope while you climbed. He got up from his chair, walked over to me, and knelt beside me. Then let me start today, he said. Let me repay you with truth, with gratitude, with the respect I should have given long ago. I placed a hand on his shoulder. His voice was trembling now, but sincere. And just like that, the temperature of the room began to change again. Still tense, still raw but healing. We didn't finish dinner that night the way we planned, but we finished something else, something deeper. We ended a cycle of silence. We punctured a myth that family sacrifices are always remembered without being spoken. And in its place, we planted something new: accountability, truth, and the unshakable reminder that even love requires light to grow. Just as the room began to exhale, as though Tyler's apology might have been enough to stitch back what had unraveled, the simmering tension erupted again from an unexpected direction. Greg, Eleanor's husband, who had been quiet for a few minutes too long, pushed his plate forward and said in a tone too sharp to be casual, "I still think this whole thing could have been handled privately. What's the point of embarrassing everyone like this over money that wasn't even legally documented?" The sentence cut through the atmosphere like a rusty blade. I turned to him slowly, my chest rising and falling as the words settled in. Tyler froze mid-motion, still crouched beside me. Eleanor's mouth parted slightly, eyes darting toward her husband in disbelief or maybe guilt. I couldn't tell. "It was never about legal documentation," I said, each word as precise as a scalpel. "It was about trust, family, honor. Do those words mean anything to you, Greg? Because they used to mean everything to me." Greg shrugged with a cynical smirk. "Well, trust is great and all, but people remember what they're told to remember. You gave them money, but then you never followed up. You never wrote anything down. How are we supposed to know you expected something back?" That was it, the spark that ignited the explosion. "I didn't need to write anything down," I said, rising slowly from my chair, my hand still resting gently on Tyler's shoulder. "Because I believed my daughter knew the cost. I believed my family didn't need paperwork to do what was right. I believed silence was enough for love to be respected. But clearly, silence is seen as weakness in this house." Julia, the niece who had earlier expressed surprise, now spoke up more boldly. "You're saying Grandma should have demanded payment? That's the only way she'd be treated fairly? Come on, Greg, that's cold." But Greg didn't back down. "I'm saying if you're going to bring up a financial agreement 7 years later, maybe don't do it during Sunday dinner like it's a surprise attack. And maybe take some responsibility too for not speaking up sooner." "Are you blaming her?" Julia asked, incredulous. Tyler stood now, his jaw tight. "Uncle Greg, this isn't your battle. This is mine, and Mom's." But Greg rolled his eyes. "Oh, so now you're the hero, Tyler? You, who didn't even know where the money came from. You didn't ask, didn't question, just let it roll in like magic. And now, just because you get caught, you're the voice of moral reckoning?" That's when Tyler exploded. "No, I didn't ask. You're right. And that's on me. But don't you dare try to minimize what Grandma did. Don't you sit there and pretend we didn't fail her because we did. I did." Greg scoffed. "You're all acting like she's some kind of martyr. She gave money. That's it. People do that. Parents help their kids. It doesn't mean we have to grovel for the rest of our lives." "I didn't want groveling," I said quietly, but the steel in my voice silenced even Greg. "I wanted a simple thank you, a moment of recognition, a phone call, a gesture, but it never came. And you, Greg, you married into this family. You inherited the story, but you never learned it." Eleanor rose now, her hands trembling. "Stop. All of you. Just stop. This is tearing everything apart." "No," I said gently. "This is revealing what was already broken." Eleanor looked at me, then really looked. Her eyes were wide and glossy, and in them I saw something shift. Not defiance, not embarrassment, but fear. The fear of someone realizing too late that the foundation they built their life on was slowly, silently cracking beneath their feet. "You think I'm ungrateful," she whispered. "I think you forgot," I replied. "And I think you convinced yourself that forgetting was okay." She sat back down, her head in her hands. "I didn't want to remember, because if I remembered, I'd have to face it. That I let you carry it all alone. That I said nothing when I should have spoken." The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. No one dared break it, not even Greg. But then Tyler walked to the center of the room and faced the entire family. "This stops with me," he said. I won't let this legacy be forgotten. Grandma, I promise you I'll tell the story. I'll make sure the world knows what you did. Not for applause, but for the truth. You don't need to tell the world, I said, walking to him. Just never let your family forget again. He nodded, his eyes wet now, but resolute. And Greg, he didn't say another word. Because when truth floods a room, arrogance has nowhere to stand. After the last words hung in the air like smoke refusing to clear, the room remained hushed. The tension, once explosive, now rippled like aftershocks gentler, but no less unsettling. Tyler stood in the middle of the dining room floor, his chest rising with each breath. No longer the confident startup guru, no longer the golden boy of our family gatherings. In that moment, he looked like something far more powerful. Someone stripped bare of ego, standing eye to eye with the truth for the first time in his life. Greg sat back stiffly, arms crossed and jaw clenched. He wouldn't speak again that evening, not because he was silenced, but because the room had already decided whose voice mattered now. For once, it wasn't his, it was mine. Eleanor's shoulders drooped, as if carrying a weight she had denied for years. Her eyes, now red-rimmed, flickered between me and Tyler. You could see it all unraveling behind them every year. She said nothing. Every moment she chose convenience over confrontation, every Sunday dinner where she smiled and let me fade further into the wallpaper. And yet, something miraculous began to happen, not with fireworks, not with shouting, but with something far rarer, action. Tyler stepped forward. I know you said you don't want the money back, he began, voice calm, but that doesn't mean I won't repay you. I need to do this for myself, for you, for this family. I didn't ask you to, I replied, eyes steady, because if I did, it wouldn't mean as much. I know, he said, but I'm doing it anyway. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, not to scroll, not to distract, but to open something. There's a scholarship fund I've been meaning to set up in the name of my future company, he continued. But I realized tonight that's not who deserves it. You do. I blinked. What are you saying? I want to start a fund, he said, in your name, Grandma, the Eleanor May Foundation, for students who are bright but have no safety net, just like I didn't until you stepped in. Every year, someone will benefit from the same grace I never fully understood until tonight, and I'll fund it with my profits. Not to look good, but because it's right. The room froze again, not with shock but reverence. You'd do that? Julia asked softly, as if breaking the silence too harshly would shatter something sacred. Tyler nodded. It's the least I can do. My lips parted, but words didn't come right away. My chest felt too tight, too full. I had walked into that day expecting nothing more than polite small talk and another meal where I sat quietly at the edge of my own family. Instead, I was being written back into history, this time in bold ink. I don't need my name on anything, I said eventually. But if you're going to give, then give with your whole heart. Don't just fund it, mentor them. Tell them the truth. Let them know that sometimes the greatest debts we carry are the ones we never realize we owe. He nodded, his eyes glistening again. Eleanor stood then, and for the first time that night, her steps were purposeful. She came to my side and knelt, not to perform, not for drama, but because her pride finally bent under the weight of her own awakening. Mom, she whispered, voice cracking, I was wrong, not just for forgetting, but for letting silence be easier than truth, for letting you carry everything without ever offering to share the load. I thought if we just moved forward, we could rewrite the past, but you deserved better than that. I placed a hand on her cheek. We can't change the past, sweetheart, but we can stop dragging its silence into the future. She nodded, eyes wet, and for the first time in decades, I felt something between us loosen, heal. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The rest of the dinner was quiet, not because people were uncomfortable, but because they were processing, digesting something bigger than food. And though no one clapped, no one made a toast, there was something profoundly complete in that silence. The kind of quiet that comes not from avoidance, but from reckoning. That night, Tyler walked me to my car. I don't know how to repay you for everything, he said quietly, holding the door open for me. You start by never forgetting again, I said, buckling in. And by teaching the next generation that not every blessing arrives with a receipt, but that doesn't mean it didn't cost someone everything. He nodded slowly. You know, I used to think legacy was about success, accolades, headlines, but I was wrong. It's about memory, about not erasing the hands that held you up. I smiled. Then maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to build something worth inheriting. He kissed my forehead, and as I drove away from the house, the night sky above, vast and black, the stars blinking like tiny whispers of old stories, I realized something else. I hadn't needed revenge. I hadn't needed restitution. What I had needed all along was to be seen. That night, in the middle of one messy, painful, beautiful family dinner, I was. And that, more than any sum of money, was how the debt was finally paid. That night, I drove home under a quiet sky, the stars flickering above like old memories refusing to fade. I didn't leave with a check or an apology printed on paper, but something far more valuable. I left with my voice reclaimed, my story no longer buried, and a legacy finally acknowledged. Sometimes the loudest battles are fought at the dinner table, and sometimes victory doesn't look like winning, but like being seen. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been quietly overlooked or powerfully underestimated, share your thoughts below. Let's start a conversation that honors those whose sacrifices have gone unspoken for too long.